You brought up monism twice. I think we have to define it. What is monism? What is the monist view?
So the monist view, it would help to start with if I introduce a distinction. So existence monism is the view that exactly one entity exists. This is the view that was for decades, if not centuries, foisted on the classical monist philosophers like Spinoza and Hegel. And it was the only it was thought that to the extent that there is an intelligible doctrine of monism at all, it must be this existence monism doctrine that exactly one entity exists. Yeah. And wow, is that a hard doctrine to swallow? Because that's saying that if to the extent that you exist and I exist, we must be identical. But clearly we're not. So, or even to go back to my number case, I was saying that there's numbers between 4 and 7. But if there's only one entity that exists, if it's even a number, then there's only one number, which is, of course, there's not just one number. In fact, from the number case, we get a trivial argument for there being some order of some infinitude of entities, not just one. So that's existence monism, and that's widely regarded as an absurd doctrine, and I agree. What my work on monism was about was bringing out another meaning for monism, which has to do with grounding, where the idea is that there's a single fundamental entity, or at least within the concrete cosmos. Let's leave the abstract entities to the side. Within concrete reality, there's a single fundamental entity, the cosmos as a whole. That's not to deny that you exist, nor is it to deny that I exist, nor is it to deny that we're not identical. Of course, we're not identical. It's rather to say that your existence and my existence are derivative existence. We're each separate derivative fragments of the same one whole. So I call that priority monism. That's the monism that I mean to be invoking.
So what are the implications? And this is channeling one of the questions that we started with. If you take the monist view of there being this integrated whole, the cosmos as a whole being fundamental, and we just happen to be derivatives of this fundamental whole, versus the pluralist view that we are actually fundamental, or even on a smaller level, that these fundamental units that come together and make up the cosmos, and the cosmos is just a derivative of these fundamental units. Either viewpoint, if I take the monist view or the pluralist view, and this is going back to the first question about the importance of asking these questions, what are some of the profound implications of taking this monist viewpoint? How does that change the way I view the world or the work I do?
Yeah, great question. I don't know that it does change the way you view the world. Well, it may change the way you view the world. I don't know if it changes the work that you do in any direct way.
Right.
This is one of these sort of background, subtle, big picture views that can maybe have profound implications in conjunction with a family of other views. But among the things that I think are at issue between the monist and the pluralist views of reality include things like how we understand physics. So if we want to think, as I do, of physics as giving us our best insight into the nature of concrete reality, we might ask, is physics giving us a picture of lots of tiny independent particles? And there are certain views of physical structure that do seem to comport well with that picture.
Yep.
Or is it giving us a picture of a single entangled cosmos? And I think there are certain ways of thinking about quantum mechanical structure in which the best way to think about reality is that what's fundamental is the wave function of the cosmos as a whole, and the physical reality of subsystems within the entangled universe is to be understood as derivative from the wave function of the cosmos as a whole. So this is the monism pluralism metaphysical question is, I think, interconnected with questions of what our best physics looks like. I think it's interconnected with a number of other sort of maybe more abstract questions about the structure of part-whole relations. Yeah. For instance, at least, so there's this classical logic of the part-whole relation called classical mereology, associated with people like Nelson Goodman. And according to classical mereology, it's a theorem of classical mereology that there is for any collection of entities in your domain, you're going to get a topmost element that is as it were, the largest whole with a W. That's the fusion of all the entities of the domain. The thing that brings them all together.
The superset.
The whole shebang.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not built into classical mereology, quite intentionally, that there have to be smallest elements. So classical mereology is intentionally constructed to be consistent with the, I think, serious empirical hypothesis that things just get ever smaller without limit. That as we sort of imagined we could sort of cut things in half, that we could just keep going limitlessly and we would never get to a smallest point. But for anything or things that we found, they would always be further divisible. It's called atomless gunk, is the label that's sometimes given for that kind of scenario. So if you're a monist, a priority monist, not an existence monist, thinks there's only one thing, but a priority monist who thinks the largest whole is fundamental, one thing that you can take comfort in, given classical mereology, is that the thing that you think is fundamental, you're guaranteed to find. But if you're a certain kind of priority pluralist who thinks that, at least this kind of thinker, who thinks that the smaller the thing is, the more fundamental it is, who thinks that like the smaller building blocks build up the larger things, you're not guaranteed to find any smallest entities in classical mereology. So you're not guaranteed to find any fundamental entities on this conception of things. So if the metaphysician was trying to find the fundamental entities that out of which reality was built, there's a worry looming for the pluralist that her search might be in vain. There might be no fundamental entities on her conception to be found. Whereas the monist, given classical mereology, is guaranteed to have an entity to point to, the whole shebang, and call it fundamental. So those are some of the more abstract, less sort of more logical and less physicsy issues that come into play in the monism pluralism debate.
You started off by saying that it might not have any practical profound implication, but I think this is a really powerful idea. And if I were to relate it into theoretical physics, for example, where they're trying to find the fundamental theory, effectively what you're saying is that if you take a top-down approach where you start with the big thing and try to keep drilling down, you might land at the most fundamental particles. But if you're going to start with this bottom-up approach where you set the benchmark of what is fundamental and try to build up, you will never actually find what's below it and what's fundamental.
You might never. It might. I think it's just simply an open empirical question whether our world bottoms out in smallest bits.
Yeah.
Or whether it happens to be limitlessly decomposable into smaller and smaller bits without end.
And your hunch is that it is decomposable. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I don't even have a hunch. I'm really agnostic on that question. I think it's just a completely open empirical question.